Hello and welcome. Solutions journalism. What does that mean? It means journalism that is intended to try and make an impact, try and find positive solutions to the many problems that we face. Now, when you switch on your TV news channels or you're reading your papers, quite often you'll see problem, 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 and sometimes not even the problems that really matter. Issues like, rural poverty or developmental issues or child mortality, but problems, political problems. And then no real answers for how those can be dealt with. Now, why is it that more journalism isn't aimed at that? And that's partly what we're going to try and answer on today's panel. Find the solutions to how we can get more solutions journalism actually to operate. And by the way, it's not entirely as dark and dismal a picture as you may feel, because the International Journalists Network recently posted that there was once a time when newspaper editors did not really believe in solutions journalism, a type of journalism that chooses to cover effective, successful responses to current social issues, as opposed to just stories of failure and tragedy. Now, they thought readers would not be interested in that. But in 2008, Liberation, a major French newspaper, tried a test. They tried to, just for one day, they said, we're going to try and do solutions journalism instead. And the answer, many people didn't want to take part in that experiment. At the end of the day, it was the top-selling newspaper of the year. Now, was that a one-off? Perhaps it was. Can other experiments be done? Perhaps they can, and I'm sure they can. So it's a great pleasure to have joining us David Bornstein, who's the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network. He's an author, he's a columnist, and he's joining us from New York. So thanks a lot, David, for being with us. And we have a great panel here as well. We have Dr. P.V. Ramesh, who's the Chairman and Managing Director of the Rural Electrification Corporation, been the Principal Secretary Health at the AP government, and has lots of thoughts on how journalists could make a big difference in areas like child mortality or maternal health, and we will come to that. Dr. K. Srinath Reddy, also interested in similar sort of things, is the President of the Public Health Foundation of India, Padma Bhushan winner. It's great to have you with us. Now, case talent, somebody's actually been doing a lot of work on it. Video volunteers, you're a human rights activist, and you've got people out there using video to tell stories, and you've actually gone to the grassroots and you're enabling them to do solutions journalism for themselves, and that's great. We'd like to get lessons from you. Pragya Vats is the General Manager Campaigns at Save the Children India, so we'll get your sense and thoughts on it as well. And Rishi Suri is a senior editor at the Daily Malap, and has also been working on, in some areas, like said, as contraception and others, the press, and the Urdu press in particular, was able to play a very prominent role in that, and we'll get some of those lessons. All right, let me start off straight away by David, coming to you. Now, if you take a look at the way most media houses function, and they will be saying, look, our audience is interested in what Donald Trump said yesterday, and what somebody said day before yesterday to attack Donald Trump, and what Kim Kardashian is doing, or you get what I mean. That's what the audience is interested in. Why would somebody want to read or watch programs on rural health or maternity issues or child mortality? Our readers and our viewers are not interested in that. How would you answer them?
The reporting is driven by curiosity. These are stories about people who are trying to solve hard problems. It's like the detective solving a case in a way. The most popular TV shows, and in fact the most popular books around the world, are detective stories. With what we have found, we've worked with close to 80 news organizations around the world now with the solutions journalism model, and what we have found is that these stories actually do quite well when they're told in this sort of, we call it a how-done-it format, where you're basically driving the narrative by curiosity. People want to understand, how did this organization do better, or how did this policy make a difference against this important problem?
But sometimes, I mean, he's right, that's one of the ways of doing it, and there's no reason why, if done effectively, it can't actually be engaging. But is there still a struggle to go to an editor, or go to managing editors or people who are printing out papers, or publishers for that matter, and saying, look, these stories can be interesting. It's not just important to tell these stories, but they can be interesting to our viewers and readers. Is that a struggle?
I think it more than often it is. And I think the problem there is that the struggle between the journalists and the management plays in a big way into that. I think to effectively tell these stories and consistently have stories on sensitive issues like health, education, etc., the entire management structure of an organization has to be on board very, very strongly. It's tough to find that balance because you really have to see what will sell and what will won't. But as long as you can do enough mainstream stories to sustain yourself, I think you should devote the remaining amount of time to such sensitive issues and doing such kind of journalism.
So the reason why you, for example, would have started Video Volunteers, is it because you felt that these are not stories that necessarily get an audience or get traction in newsrooms?
There is a big issue of media diversity. I mean diversity, it is at both levels. the diversity of content and the diversity of those producing the content, which we believe are totally linked. So if you look at most mainstream media structures, we could actually figure out the social profiles and the religious profiles and the class profiles of the people producing this content. And the question then is that how much of that profile of the content producers reflect on the content that is being produced. We of course have this city-centric nature of news production, and then there's this the pressure of the breaking news, and then politics and sports and crime taking center stage in all news. Now if that were the situation, then all these so-called important, relevant issues that in India specifically 70% of the population go through every day is pushed under the carpet. The way to change that for us is to change the profile of the producers of content, which is why we went to communities to train them.
So David said sometimes you should find people who found the solution and tell their stories, and that's the most effective way to do this.
Perhaps.
So I'm going to learn a lesson from David right now and show some of your stories and show how you did it, and let's see if it actually works.
कभी भी गांव में महिला जो चाहते हैं वो उनको आज भी नहीं मिलता है। तो मैंने फर्स्ट टाइम वीडियो बनाया, तो मैं उस गांव में गई, मीटिंग किया, तो किसी भी महिला ने मुझे इंटरव्यू नहीं दिया। उस वीडियो में मैं खुद पात्र बनी।
पैसे की इतना नहीं है कि मैं पैसे ही नहीं कमाऊं, मैं समाज में इज्जत भी कमाऊं और समाज के लिए कुछ भी करूं। मैं जंगल किनारे हूं, वहाँ से जो जंगल की निगरानी नहीं करने से जानवर बाहर निकलकर लोगों को तंग करता है। मैंने गई शूटिंग करने के लिए, शूटिंग की है, उसके बारे में उनसे पूछे कि जो भी जंगली जानवर जो हाथी जो होता है घर उजाड़ता है उसका मुआवजा मिलता है।
देखने को ये मिलता है कि कंपनियों की वजह से वहाँ का जो सारा वेट मटेरियल जो जिसको राखड़ बोला जाता है वो सारा राखड़ बह के निकलता है कंपनी से, उस खेत से वह तालाब को आता है और तालाब से गांव की दूरी है मात्र 200 मीटर, जिसके लिए मैंने पर्यावरण अधिकारी से कई बार बात किया।
गांव में महिलाओं को शौचालय से लेकर कई ऐसे समस्या हो रहे थे जिस पे हमने बदलाव किया। उनकी सुरक्षा को लेके बहुत खतरा हो रहा था, जिस पे मैंने वीडियो बनाया और अधिकारी से मिली।
मेरे पास कैमरा था, हमने उसको कैमरे में शूट किया पूरा। 1 साल बाद में वो वीडियो इतना पब्लिश हुआ कि वहाँ पे हमारे डीएम, एसपी सब लोग गए और आज वो 50 गांव इतने डेवलप हो गए कि वहाँ पे इस तरह का व्यवहार नहीं होता है गांव में।
फेसबुक पे बहुत ज़्यादा हाईलाइट हुआ था थर्ड जेंडर का, जिसकी वजह से उसका ये प्रॉब्लम हो गया जो मैंने वीडियो बनाया उसका, कि उसको जॉब से निकाल दिया गया। फिर उसके बाद हम लोग बैंक पे गए, जेके बैंक, जहाँ पे हमने अकाउंट खोल दिया, उसका एक ख़त्म कर दिया कि थर्ड जेंडर है, हमें एक्सेप्ट करना है उसको।
ये जो करना है समाज के लिए ही करना है।
আমার দ্বারা যদি লোকের কিছু উপকার হয়, গরিব লোক যদি কিছুটা আমার দ্বারা যদি গরিব লোকের কিছু ভালো হয়, এটাই আমি চাই এখন।
Essentially, solutions journalism in a different way. You get grassroots volunteers to go out and film stories and put them out. But that still doesn't completely remove the question that we started with, which Rishi was echoing, that to get that, for example, put onto mainstream media and to get that put onto TV channels and papers, you've still got to convince managements that, yes, this is something that's going to make sense. Journalists may want to do it. How do you convince the publishers and the CEOs and others who will say, well, you know, this is not necessarily good for the top line of the business?
The way we define solutions journalism is just rigorous reporting that looks at how people are responding to social problems with an idea to surfacing models that often can be, if you understand them, they can be adopted or replicated in other places. And what we have found is that when these stories are told, and I've had this experience myself because I write a column in the New York Times that looks at solutions, they tend to go viral very often. A lot of our stories are on the most emailed list, for example. But I think the key distinction is you're not really telling a story about a nonprofit that's doing good work. This is obviously Video Volunteers is doing great work. What you're doing is you're telling a story about how a group of people manage to go into a situation and get a different result, so that people generally want to stay with these stories and want to share these stories because they're interested in the idea and what you can learn from them and how that model can be shared and adopted, often in other places.
All right, let me just come to the rest of you. And what are your issues that you sometimes face when it comes to trying to get big, powerful stories or important areas? And we've got some of the solutions, some of the answers from David and also from him. What are the major challenges that you face?
We are so used to, in the modern times, in the era of social media and breaking news, we forget that there's a whole lot of world outside. And just for example, what I have seen myself is the big challenges of the maternal and child health. In this country, every year 56,000 women die in childbirth. There are 12 lakh children. They don't even get to be 1 year old.
Yeah.
And you know, that hardly gets attention. There are a lot of things that happen at the local level. People are trying to find solutions. So for a long time I worked in the tribal areas, this was in 80s when there was hardly any access to media. Now a number of things people do locally. This is communities working together to find solutions to the problems, activists, community workers. Now these are compelling stories. These stories need to be told to others, to other communities, the other societies.
But they're not told.
They're not told.
Why?
They're not told maybe because it is not told. We believe that people are not waiting to see these stories.
Let's first identify what the real problem is, why no one is doing it, and then we can maybe find a solution to it.
Well, there are a number of public health challenges where actually we require the media to focus attention on, and to also engage the citizens in action wherever possible. Now that doesn't always happen because they are not considered to be attractive enough in terms of sensationalism. So you do need to find out where there is a potential for moving what might be an op-ed type of story into the front page or a feature type of story, by finding out, is there a point where there is outrage of the citizen that can be aroused, major concern of the citizen that can be aroused, and bring in a human interest story where possible.
You start protests and you burn a few buses and
no, don't need to do that. Don't need to.
That's one extreme way of doing it.
Let me give you an example. When the Parliamentary Standing Committee on tobacco, on the tobacco pictorial health warnings issue, said there is no evidence linking tobacco and cancer, the media backed the campaign against them. The citizens erupted in outrage, and ultimately the pictorial warning stood.
The way the media is functioning these days, and whether it's television news, I mean, certainly in television news, outrage is what seems to work. You know, you can get really agitated and shout at a few people, it seems to do well, and that those sort of stories will play out because it enables the media to feed off outrage. But what happens in other cases where there's not necessarily outrage?
No, you can even highlight success
stories. Or how do you get outrage over issues like the fact that there are so many thousands of children who are dying every day? It's shocking. The number of children who are trafficked. And even that term itself is a ghastly term, but you know, the fact that so many children are sold into sexual slavery on the streets of our city, you know, and there's not anger enough about that, emotion enough about that. Do you think sometimes there should be more emotion about these issues, and we just take these statistics, we hear the statistics and we move on, the number of children who are dying, the number of children who are being sold into slavery?
I think I'll go back to where you started talking about the solutions and what we want to really show. And it's really important, like it should touch the chord, because if we say that 12 lakh children, as you were talking about, they're dying before their 5th birthday, if X million children are out of school, why does it just remain a number? We have to break it down, because it's not merely numbers. There are people like you and me who may not be that advantaged, but their stories do not hit the headlines because they do not mean TRP. It's about solution journalism, and I think that's where the key to the response is. That how do you offer solution? Because when you're highlighting X number of children dying, you're also talking about what will save them. So I think both need to go hand in hand, because I think as much as solution journalism needs to work, it also needs to focus on, all of us need to talk about solutions rather than just the problems.
Yeah.
So again, it's about sustaining the momentum. We made commitments, but are we really seeing it through? So we see these sort of, punctuated spurts of media spotlight on the issues when things are happening, but it dies down soon after. So I think it's a sustaining the spotlight on the issue of the challenge.
Okay, you want to add to that, and then I'll come out with some of my potted theories on this issue?
No, actually, a couple of good points raised by her. I think follow-up is one big problem that we face in the media. We often do a couple of stories and then it just vanishes. And I think that story is more with national media. Though if you actually look at regional and vernacular language media, the problem is not as severe as it is in the national media. It's just that these particular organizations, these particular newspapers are so small that they are limited to their own sphere and they don't really get heard of outside. So I think working, even within the media, working together, highlighting these particular stories from within the media for larger media organizations is one thing that will really help.
At the end of the day, if you're judging media success on the basis of TRPs, which is what you tend to do on the television channels, because TRPs is what advertising comes from, so you need a certain amount of TRPs. If you're going to judge media success only on the basis of circulation and TRPs, which the management of those publications will say you have to, that's what their investors are going to be judging them on, then I know David says it is still possible to do things which will get those TRPs and which will get that readership, but sometimes people struggle with it. So how do you break that nexus, I think, is one of the first questions that I'm hoping that all of you will help us answer. Journalists, the reporters, don't become reporters to say, oh, I'm going to shout at somebody and that's how I'm going to make my career. They want to do important stories. They want to solve the problems of poverty or whatever it is. But how do you convince management that that's important?
TRPs or circulation, I think they're an integral part of this larger responsibility. We are all part of the society, and the one way the media really reaches out to the fundamental issues that we are confronting obviously raises those issues, and that is important to the citizens. I mean, that is what citizenship is about. And that is how you educate the society to act. I mean, the individual is aroused to act, is challenged to act. And more importantly is, this is how the information gets disseminated, and this is how others pick up these ideas. And somebody has to start somewhere.
I think it's about, there are isolated changes that are happening around the world, like stories of impact, be it Stalin's video volunteers or an Abhay Bang, say for instance Maharashtra, who worked phenomenally over the decades to kind of reduce neonatal mortality. But do we see that in the visible space? No. The challenge is really twofold. One is that how do you collect what's happening on the ground to communicate to the wider audience, which may be as cool, as sexy as it were, because that's what sells, and systemic.
Okay. But would part of your solution then be that, look, let's bypass traditional media completely?
Definitely one of the solutions. That's not the solution we are currently pursuing, because in India you have very low internet coverage. So people like us cannot directly reach the audiences. Even if we were to reach the audiences, we do still face the same issue, that the urban audiences seemingly are not interested in rural issues. Now, to me, part of the solution lies in the way we tell stories. Yeah. Because we have had, say, the film industry or the literature business or the painting and the performing arts spaces where people have bridged stories across classes and castes and regions and religions and languages. So we have to also reinvent the narrative format, the storytelling formats.
To get all the audience out here to come up with some thoughts and some suggestions on it, and then return to the panel, because I still have one fundamental question, that those are great reports and they resonate. Why? Because there's a problem and there's a possible solution, and you see it and you say, well, all right, maybe this is something which we can engage with. but how do you get it to be aired more often? That fundamental question still not been answered. When we return, just after this break. Welcome back. How do you use journalism to make a difference? Solutions journalism. How can you tell stories that actually make an impact? And then how do you also get over the second part of that? How do you ensure that those stories are actually carried in the papers, on television channels, when they may not necessarily be the ones that make the most amount of sense from a TRP or a circulation point of view? So you, I know, have done various media partnerships and done that successfully, which, by the way, is one of the models that we here at NDTV have found particularly successful. We've done, whether it is Saving the Tiger or Problems of Girl Children or Swachh Bharat campaign or the Greenathon, or there are a number of issues we have been able to raise, and we've been able to raise on a sustained basis. And we found the answer was partnerships. You get like-minded people together, you get NGOs, you get people who care about it, you get corporates who care about it and are willing to fund that entire campaign, and then you put the whole thing together into one campaign. Now that's one approach, a possible solution, and one that we have used. But have you found media partnerships successful?
Yes, of course. I believe the media is a very important ally, and I would not rule out the traditional media also from that alliance, while certainly the social media is going to be very critical currently in these times. We have to bring on the mainstream media as well. But how do you actually engage the media in solutions journalism? Firstly, I think the way the questions and the stories are framed becomes very important. If you say infant mortality is 40 or 41, people are not going to react to that number. On the other hand, if you say that Bangladesh and Nepal have lower infant mortality than India, then the Indian pride gets pricked. If you say that the life expectancy in India is the second lowest, just a nose ahead of Pakistan, but behind Nepal and Bangladesh, then the Indian pride gets pricked. Then get the people engaged. The young people are not insensitive. They are responding to environmental issues. They are responding to health issues. Frame it as a human interest story, either as a problem and preferably as a solution, which a community or an individual has actually managed to bring about, and then create a social media buzz around it, engage them ultimately in a larger campaign, and then your management will respond.
So that's a successful way of doing it. Can I just get David in on that? So, you know, David, also, we were briefly talking about the way of going past the traditional methods of dissemination. Is that something you think is going to be increasingly important as the internet gains more and more, reaches more and more areas, and certainly as social media spreads, you can sometimes create a buzz bypassing the usual traditional bottlenecks?
Oh, for sure, you can do that. But can I just go back to the point that just came up because I think it's particularly important. I totally agree that what makes solutions journalism powerful and what actually makes it compelling is when you're able to mobilize outrage and use it as an accountability mechanism. If you look at the number of people, 56,000 women in India, different communities across the country have very different rates. Some of them are doing much better than others. Some of them are doing much smarter things than others. If you're able to show through solutions journalism what's possible, then what happens is the places that are doing poorly, what they're doing becomes much less legitimate. It takes away their excuses for subpar performance. It makes people angrier. Why are we having such a high maternal mortality rate in our district when another district with the same level of resources is half our level? If you're able to show that, not even at the national level, but at the district level, it creates tremendous pressure on people. And then people say, well, how did they do it? And then you get into the storytelling, how they actually did it. People want to know the answer. So it's a way of creating pressure through an accountability mechanism. But the thing that's different is it's accountability without creating apathy and fatalism. It's accountability that creates energy and also shows available possibilities. That activates people. And then you're able to see, very often when you tell these stories and you're showing what's possible in one case, other places will say, oh, let's try that, or let's try a version of that and see if we get similar results.
Interesting you say that because, frankly, we've also tried some stories and some reports of telling stories slightly differently and about some different issues, and we did actually notice a distinct change in response. So, for example, as part of the Every Life Counts campaign, our reporter Amba Batrabakshi did a special documentary on how to deal with prenatal depression. Now, many people know perinatal depression, I beg your pardon. And at the end of the day, many people don't know that more people die of this sort of depression than there are farmers' suicides in the country. And when we did that particular report, we did it both in English and in Hindi, also had some of the other aspects to it, got a massive response. Let's just show you the report and let's try and see if that in some way is reflecting what many of us have been saying out here as the right way to report these stories.
Nandita, an IT professional from Bengaluru, began to hallucinate after her baby was born.
I was not supposed to go out of the house. I was only with the baby all the time. And totally, everything is revolving around the baby. So that's when it got worse.
Nandita got help. But according to the National Crime Records Bureau, over 20,000 young mothers, mainly housewives, kill themselves every year, making them the largest demographic in India to be committing suicide, followed by farmers.
I think it is an important question. Why are female suicide rates in youth in India so high? Actually 6 to 7 times higher than, for example, comparable age groups in Western Europe.
20% of mothers in developing countries experience clinical depression after childbirth, says the World Health Organization. But in India, there's still little recognition of this illness. The symptoms can be mild, like anxiety, crying spells, mood swings, lack of sleep. Others have difficulties in bonding with the baby, negative thoughts and hallucinations.
15 out of 100 women will have some, significant mental health problem, either depression or very severe anxiety. So if you calculate it with the number of women who are available who are there in India, you know that the magnitude is really huge.
Now, for thousands of women in India, especially in villages, who go undiagnosed and battle childbirth-related depression, there is treatment under the newly launched PRIME project in Sihor. The PRIME project, designed by Professor Vikram Patel, integrates mental health care with primary health care. But of the 29 states in India, only Madhya Pradesh has an intervention program for natal depression-related problems.
Replicating Madhya Pradesh's model may well be the need of the hour, as with 130 million births in India annually, more women are likely to suffer if nothing is done for them.
So that's one example of a report that got a really positive response. A lot of people saw it, a lot of people reacted to it, a lot of people interacted with that, sent us questions, comments, obviously struck a chord, and we will a little while later show you another report that we found had a major reaction. But David, before you leave us, I just wanted to get a sense. You did a study, right? 755 American adults were presented with 1 or 6 news articles, and you studied their response to very similar articles when there was just a problem and when there was a problem with a possible response to mitigate the effects of that problem. And you found that the level of interaction was much more in the second category, which is what we just saw with Amba's report.
That's correct. And I thought Amba did a fantastic job with that story. What we found is that when we did this A-B study, and we've actually done a subsequent one, we didn't do the studies ourselves, the University of Texas at Austin did the studies. They found that people shared the stories more, they stayed with them longer, they felt more empowered, they felt that it's possible to solve these problems, so they felt a greater sense of efficacy. And in the subsequent study, they also found that there was greater time on page, something about around 25% longer time spent with the article. And the researchers don't really understand the results 100%, but the presumption is that it's the feeling of efficacy, the feeling that there's something you can do about this problem that makes people spend more time with them, that actually gives people more value from the story. You look at the American election, I mean, there's a great feeling of powerlessness, lack of efficacy, a kind of desire to throw a wrecking ball into the machine that so many citizens seem to feel and express publicly. I would argue that the media has created a narrative where many people feel very powerless every day. They hear about the problems relentlessly. They exist. They need to know about them. Of course, we have to be aware. But they don't really know that there's a lot more responses out there and there's a lot more adaptive possibilities than we often think of, and that citizens can be much more powerful. And so Amba's story is a great example because the methodology of helping these mothers is actually not rocket science. It can be done by any hospital, any health center that has the training to understand how to do the follow-up. Of course, the medications have to be available. But even in the United States, where there's a lot more recognition of depression, there's very, very few places, very few gynecologists or obstetric units actually screen for depression across the United States. So this is a classic example where telling the story about how people are responding better and saving lives can, in fact, move the needle and actually save lives. We're talking about for communication, it's such a crucial part of helping people understand what they need to do or what they could be doing that they're not yet doing.
All right, David, thank you so much for having joined us. Quickly show you one more case study. This was Shai Venkatramana did a report on how technology is improving maternal and neonatal health in India. Again, this is something called M-Mitra. Take a look at this, and again we'll try and see why this particular report struck a chord.
आप पेट से है? हाँ। नाम किधर पे डाला है आपने? आयुर्वेदिक में। ऐसा किसी ने आपको कार्ड दिया मोबाइल से? नहीं जानकारी आएगा? नहीं दिया। तो मैं क्या आपको समझा सकती है किस तरह से आपको पालेगा? घर पे आओ अंदर। हाँ।
जैसे आप पेट से है तो आपका सेहत का और आपके आने वाले बच्चे के सेहत के बारे में पूरी जो जानकारी है बच्चा 1 साल का होने तक मोबाइल से फ्री में आएगी। कैसे आएगी वो मैं आपको बताती है कि जैसा जैसा आपका महीना बढ़ रहा है तो महीने के हिसाब से वजन कितना होना चाहिए, हाँ, खाने में क्या क्या खाने का जिससे आपका सेहत तंदुरुस्त रह सकता है। आप जो भी दवाखाने में ट्रीटमेंट ले रहे हैं तो कौन से महीने में कौन सा सुई लगेगा।
18 साल में शादी हुई, फिर उसके बाद बच्चा हो गया। तो पहला बच्चा क्या कमज़ोर था, फिर बताया उसको हार्ट की प्रॉब्लम है। तब उतनी जानकारी मुझे नहीं थी कैसा बैठना चाहिए, कैसा उठना चाहिए। इस बार क्या है ना, मुझे खाने पीने की नॉलेज मिल गई है और जैसे फ़ोन आता है बताते हैं कि ये खाना चाहिए, ऐसा सोना चाहिए, जैसा कहीं दर्द उठे तो फटाक से दवाखाने में जाना चाहिए।
Worst thing that can happen to a doctor is to actually have a patient coming dying in the emergency ward. You open her papers up and you see that actually you had seen her in 3rd month and then she never came back. When mobile phone came to India, suddenly it struck me, I was going around and seeing even everybody has a mobile phone now. You go into any slum, the boy working in my house had a mobile phone. There are more mobile phones in India than toilets. So then it struck me that you could use the phone to reach across to women with life-saving information more often than you can possibly do in person.
मुझे पूछना है कि ये मिस कॉल कैसे लगाते हैं?
अगर आप अपना मोबाइल में अपना नंबर, हमारा M-Mitra का नंबर सेव करके रखेंगे तो अगर रिंग बजते है तो कभी कभी क्या हम लोग नहीं उठाते, लेकिन M-Mitra का नाम देख के आप फोन उठा सकते हैं तुरंत।
5th मंथ के बाद स्टार्टिंग मतलब कॉल पे बताया आपकी बेबी दिन में इतने बार घूमेगा, तो वो सुन के मैं वेट कर दी जब मेरा बेबी कब घूमेगा।
Many people here in the audience are, many of you are journalism students as well. Let me see if any of you have questions or suggestions, actually. More than questions, suggestions to make. Yeah.
India has been declared polio-free, and for that a lot of media house, even government and the private, they joined hands, and some NGOs also chipped in to support. So can't we like tackle one problem at a time in which everyone is giving his support?
Interesting question. Find one problem, take that problem, get the media to cooperate in solving that problem. And that's partly ties up with what happened with immunization as well and the Urdu press.
Yes, absolutely. So this was one instance where the media worked very closely with the rest of the civil society to make a big difference. I would love to take all the credit for it, but I think UNICEF needs to be lauded for their work in that as well, because they provided the continuous strategy and vision again and again. They held a lot of meetings with senior editors very regularly. Organizations, NGOs like Shikhar and Rubaru, etc. Really played a big part in that. We at Milap personally carried out a campaign for over a year in this. So every Sunday, Milap has 2 pages of human interest stories. And we made sure that for 1 year, at least 1, otherwise 2 stories on preventive care or immunization were published as op-eds, as data pieces. Stories of different journalists working in this sector to help these issues every Sunday for 1 year. We worked with a lot of NGOs to get the word out even further. We tied up with very, very small newspapers, very, very small publications in cities and even villages, and sent them content on a monthly basis for free for them to publish.
So that campaign mode does make a difference. And frankly, we found that also, whether it's a Tiger, whether it's a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the minute we do it as a campaign, it does make a big difference. So final thoughts from all of you now. We are almost out of time.
You talked about that how India is now polio-free. So one of the things that we really need to do as a media, as civil society and as a collective is to celebrate successes, which we don't do enough. Because we switch on the television, we say, oh, that someone raped, someone killed. It's mostly like problems that we see. But do we celebrate, stop and celebrate that, hey, it's a matter of pride for the nation. We have reached that milestone.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that's one, celebrating successes as a collective, as a nation. Second, I feel is that it's not just a job of media to cover a story, say a child dying or a mother dying because of lack of access to health care, but what can you do? I think it's about putting the responsibility not just on one agency or the other, but each one of us, because we are all citizens of this country.
That's probably the combination. We need partnerships not just from the people on the ground working on those issues. Definitely we need mainstream media carriers, publications to carry those stories. We also need business houses and corporations, people with money to back the issues, and most importantly we need audiences and viewers and readers to further perpetuate and create a collective interest in positive stories.
As we go forward in that, I think we should perhaps reveal that NDTV is going to be working very closely with video volunteers and others to take those stories, take them to the next level, make sure that they reach the decision makers. That's the way we can partner with some of these initiatives, and we will go on doing that, and let's hope others do as well. Okay, final closing thoughts from you.
Whether it's a print story or a visual medium or even a film, people like to see the human spirit triumphing over adversity and overcoming challenges. So providing those kind of solutions, the right kind of space, especially when they're innovative. Innovation doesn't necessarily mean technology. Even innovative solutions come from human spirit and system innovations. So if they can be highlighted, then people will respond much more positively, and that will bring up the TRPs.
All right.
Those 2 stories that you showed, I think, very compelling stories of common interest. I mean, it touches everybody's life. And I think the way that you frame the narrative and how you sustain it for a long period of time. You yourself have said that the campaign mode tends to capture the imagination of a large segment. But that needs to be sustained. And this whole belief that it is infotainment and of TV news and the tabloidization in the print media is what really is capturing the imagination. I think we need to move away from that.
We need to move away from that. Rishi, you have any other final closing comments before I wrap?
Just, I think, show the problem, show the solution, and media across sectors, TV, print, online, need to work together a little more closely.
All right, so as we are talking about solutions journalism, this really is a solution that all of us seem to be able to come up with. Reporters and journalists need to be able to tell those stories, tell them effectively, tell them with a positive spin or a positive connotation or a way that people can actually find solutions. That's what they need to do. Newspaper publishers, editors, television channel editors and owners, they need to be able to back stories like that, and they need to find ways of putting the partnerships together that will enable them to have them out there as a campaign and do that in a regular manner. That's what they need to do. And all of you out there as viewers and readers, yes, you do need to find some time. You need to spend that time in watching those stories, reading those stories, giving your inputs, interacting, and helping spread the word. That will make everyone feel, yes, this is something worth doing. Because believe me, it is something that is worth doing. Thanks a lot for watching.